Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Tough Coffee Shop Talk. I'm your host, Rhonda Lavoie, and this week we're talking about boundaries. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Because each week, I meet with members from the Tough Collaborative to chat about varying topics, and each week you can join me here as I review the topic of the week. We have a wide range of topics discussing anything from business building techniques to personal development ideas. And the best part is, I feel the topics can touch anybody, no matter what their adventure is in life. If you're self-employed, entrepreneur, work in a corporation, stay-at-home parent, retired, or in between jobs, I think there's just a little bit for everyone. So I'd like to dive right in. Let's get to this week's conversation of the week. Hello, and welcome back. We're going to be talking about boundaries today. What are they? Why do we need them? How to set them and how to stick with them. So to get started, I thought we would talk about what are the different types of boundaries that we can have. We can have physical boundaries. So our physical space, the presence that we're in, we just have boundaries on who can enter that space. Time boundaries, this is probably one we'll talk about quite a bit tonight. Ensuring that we're securing our time or being sensitive of our time to others and from others. Material boundaries, so the things that we have material in our life, like our objects, or say our vehicle or money or different things that we physically possess, we might have some boundaries around that. And then of course, emotional and mental boundaries. And we can set limitations and boundaries ultimately on each of these areas. So again, that's physical, time, material, emotional, and mental. Physical boundaries, so our space, that sphere around us that we don't like people to come into, our physical presence. So an example would be this is some people might be a hugger and some may not be a hugger. So, if you aren't a hugger, people trying to hug you is, something that you sometimes need to create a boundary around so that people know that they aren't just allowed to hug you because they're a hugger. And as a hugger, I can tell you this is a challenging thing, but you can set boundaries so that when people are encroaching in that personal space, they learn that that's not an okay thing to do, that they're coming into that safe space and it's, not welcome. Sometimes this is an easy one to interpret because often if that's the case, the person you're trying to give the hug to may, push you away or make a funny face or simply just say no. But it's something that we need to be aware of, is that not everybody is okay with you being in their personal space. One that's a big deal for me is there's sometimes those people that like to talk to you incredibly close. So they're like inches away from your face. I always back up because it's too close for me. I don't feel comfortable having people coming into that physical space that close to me. So I have a boundary that I've set that, you need to be at least this far away before I feel comfortable in the conversation. And having those boundaries, is important because if you're uncomfortable in that situation because they're hugging you or they're talking too close to you or they're standing too close to you, then, it's going to make conversations with these people challenging, or it may affect your personal health because you are, stressed and agitated because they're entering that boundary. So when it comes to physical boundaries, it's actually a little bit easier to set them because we have such outward reaction to them. But if we talk about, say, material boundaries. So material boundaries could be things like money or possessions, things that often we struggle creating boundaries around when it comes to our close friends and family. So think about it. Say you have family that need to borrow your truck all the time because they don't have one, but it bothers you that they borrow it all the time. You can set a boundary on them utilizing that physical possession of yours, that material. It's called a material boundary, so that you're not doing something that you feel uncomfortable doing. as soon as you set that boundary, of course, then it's easier for you to ensure that you feel comfortable with that use. So as my example, the use of a vehicle, but it can be money too. Money it's a material thing. So sometimes those close to us ask for money, and sometimes we're uncomfortable borrowing that money and we need to set boundaries. Or perhaps you have somebody in your family or your life who have borrowed money continuously. Sure, they maybe pay it back, but they continuously have to borrow it, and it's weighing on you that you no longer want to give it. And sometimes it's really hard to make that decision and stick to that boundary by saying no because it's family or because you've said it so many times. But you need to know that by not setting that boundary, by allowing that to continue to happen, you're actually causing additional stress to yourself, which is, of course, not good for yourself or anybody else. By adding that stress to your relationship or adding that stress to yourself by not sticking to your boundary can certainly be a detriment to yourself. So I would encourage you to think about, when are the times in your life that you've had someone potentially encroach on that material boundary, or on that, asking for something material that you want to set a boundary on. So maybe they're taking advantage. This would be a good term to kind of understand if you're needing to have a boundary there. Maybe you feel you're being taken advantage of and you no longer want to be, which means you want to change the expectation, set a boundary. If you can think of times like that in your life, then or please know that it is possible to set boundaries around those things, and that it's okay to do so. And it is your right to do so. If they are your physical, your material possessions, so your money, your vehicle, your cell phone, your home, somebody living in your home as an example. Say you have somebody, living rent-free and you want to change that. Any of those things, this is your opportunity, and it is your possession, your material item that you have the right to set a boundary on. And it's actually not selfish to do so often, because often when you get to the point where you need to set that boundary, there's one of kind of two things that have happened. One, it's time for that person who is borrowing or using that, encroaching on that boundary. It's usually time for them to start looking after themselves and taking care of it, and you providing this material object, money, place to live, vehicle, whatever it might be, is actually enabling them to continue to do those things. Or the other piece that could happen is you could get to the situation where you no longer can supply those things. Maybe you need that money and you can't give it out anymore. Or maybe you need to rent out your bedroom to somebody who's actually going to pay the rent. Financially, you're in a situation that you can no longer do that. And it's okay. It's okay for you to say no in those instances and ensure that you are looking after yourself and that you're setting that boundary. It may be hard to do, but my suggestion would be to do it. So set that boundary when before, I guess is probably a better way to put it. So before it becomes a problem. So ensure that you have the conversation of, okay, you can borrow the car this time, but I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to borrow it anymore because XYZ. And actually, you don't even need a because. You can just say that. But set it not in a time of desperation. So no, you can't borrow the car, and you've never told them that they can't borrow it before. Or that's it, you got to get out because you haven't paid rent. Try and have the conversations before it comes to a head, ultimately. And you'll be a lot more successful when it comes to it. Boundary is certainly a very challenging thing to set. And the two that we've talked about so far, so physical boundaries, that physical space, and material boundaries, so the things that we have in life. Sometimes those two are kind of the easier to do because they're a physical thing. But when we talk about time boundaries, it gets a lot more challenging. So time boundaries would be when someone is using your time and you don't want them to use it in that manner anymore. In real estate, this is one that comes up often because when you start in real estate and your clients are contacting you at who knows what time, it could be first thing in the morning, late at night, or you're responding to 50 text messages back and forth and utilizing your time. In the beginning, these are sacrifices you're willing to make because you're trying to get off the ground, because you're trying to get established in the industry and you don't want to say no. You don't want to be the one who removes you from the situation by saying no. But I promise you, as you get further into your real estate career, you are going to need to say no. You are going to need to set boundaries because eventually you'll approach burnout or you'll determine that there's other things in life that you also want to focus and allow time for. So for example, your family or your friends. Another part of your life, perhaps you have a hobby that you want to have. So you need to be able to set these boundaries with your clients so that you can ensure to have a second life, not just a life revolving around real estate. But as business owners and as real estate agents, it's very challenging to do that, especially in the beginning, because we're so afraid to say no and set that boundary. And I think the reason we're afraid to say no is sometimes or often in life, we only say no when it's the last straw. And that's really the challenge here. And that's really where you need to make the difference is. You need to set up an expectation ahead of time so that you're not saying no out of desperation or angst or because you're burnt out and tired of, this client and you like maybe burst or say something to the client that you later are upset that you did. But if we would have set expectations with that client in the beginning on how we will communicate and how we will use our time, you shouldn't get to that. You shouldn't get to that blow up point where you're frustrated with the client because they are most clients are going to stay within the boundaries you outline from the beginning. So my suggestion to real estate agents as an example, but also this can apply to everyone, is set the expectation with the client early on. So when you're meeting with a client to determine, what their needs are, what is it from a real estate perspective that they're looking to do? Perhaps they're looking to purchase a property and they want to purchase in the next 6 months and they have, 3 little kids and they, only work on weekend, or they can only see houses on weekends because they both work, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and then the evenings are busy with kids. So when you have that meeting up front and you know that they can only see houses on weekends, if you're not willing to work weekends, perhaps you're not a good fit for this client. And this is the time to determine if you're going to say no. And when I say no, I say, I am not the right fit, but perhaps I can connect you with someone who is. And you connect them with a referral partner. So you're not actually saying no. You're saying, I'm not the right person for the job, but I know who is, and they will look after you. And this is important because once you've shown houses to them for every weekend through the summer, and now you're getting frustrated because they haven't written an offer on something, it's going to show in your relationship with that client. Where if you would have referred them out to somebody who does work weekends, they would be much happier because that person isn't going to get frustrated with them because they've been looking on the weekends. Or another example would be perhaps when you are meeting with these clients in the beginning, you let them know that you are available in the evenings to respond to messages as long as they're, important. So, which is a bit of a trick because of course clients are going to think everything they have to say is important. So you need to set an example of what that means and, be specific with the client. So, I, in my business, like to respond to messages as much as I can. However, if we are not in an active deal situation, I may not get back to you for, a few minutes or even up to an hour because I have a family and we have things that we do in the evenings and on weekends. If we're in an active deal, please know that I will absolutely be responsive to your needs and will be responding as quickly as possible, as it is important to me that you are well looked after. But if they message you, Saturday afternoon and you're out at the park with your kids and you don't get back to them for, an hour or so to their question that has nothing to do with a current deal, say they're just, oh, who is this person that you said I should talk to? Or, what about this, about that property, whatever it might be. They now have the expectation that it's okay if I don't get back to them for an hour or so because it's Saturday afternoon and I'm likely out with my family. And that's okay. It's okay to set those boundaries. And when you're setting those boundaries in the beginning and you're saying and setting what the expectation is, if when you're finished having that conversation, they do not feel comfortable with you not responding within an hour, it's probably a good idea to refer them out to somebody who doesn't have kids and isn't going to be busy on the weekends and is going to be able to respond that quickly. And that's okay. Ultimately, your goal as a real estate agent is to find the people to work with that best match your ideal client. Who do you want to work with? Because the more people that you have that fit that description, the more successful you'll be, the happier you'll be, and the more prosperous your business will be. Simply because you will be having positive experiences over and over and over again. If you try and fit clients into your business that do not match your expectation, it's going to be a lot more challenging for you to get that momentum because you're going to be having some negative experiences that are outside of what it is that you were hoping your client would be like. Now, I say this, and we all go through this in our careers, especially early on, ultimately because we don't know who our ideal client is. We do not know what that looks like. And we don't know what boundaries we want to set until we've gone through a lot of the ups and downs of the first few years of real estate. So please know that if you're early on in your career, that I'm not saying you should start saying no to everybody. What I'm saying is you need to start to determine what it is that you feel comfortable with to determine then what to say no to and what boundaries to set. And time boundaries in our industry are probably the most productive or have the best return for you. Because if you can set boundaries on when you do certain things, not only will it help you with your personal life and your family life, but it'll also help you ensure that you're supplying the best service to your client. And it will just set you up for some success. And as you go through your career, you will learn that you will put more and more value on your time because you're getting busier and busier in your career. So if you are getting that busier and busier in your career and you're starting to see that momentum, you'll need that time to be able to service those more clients because you're going to have more of the ideal client coming in. So as you go through your career, that time boundary will certainly come up. You may not see it today, but it'll certainly come up. And it's absolutely important that you start to think about those things. The other piece that you can do with time boundaries is also create some systems and tools to optimize your time with your clients, which will then help with your communication. Examples of this would be creating templates for yourself. So create an onboarding template as an example. So you'd create an onboarding template that has a list of questions that you want to ask this client and things that you want to communicate to them, so that when you are onboarding that new client, there's a clear expectation of what this process is going to look like. Saves you a whole bunch of time because you've asked the right questions up front. If you're curious about my onboarding template, by all means, reach out. I'd be happy to share it with you and to have a discussion about that. Other templates that you can have would be follow-up email type templates. So, when you have a conditional offer, you would have a templated email that outlines what to expect next. Having that templated email saves you extra time trying to draft it from scratch every time and ensures that you're communicating consistently with your clients. So templated emails and templates in general will help with setting boundaries. I've spoken about templates before in a previous podcast. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes if you're curious about it. All right, let's move on. So the last boundary would be emotional and mental boundaries. So this would be to protect that emotional energy and your well-being, and ultimately respecting your ideas, beliefs, and opinions, even if they differ. So this one's actually kind of big. Just think about like a political landscape. We all have our own views and perspectives on life, and sometimes we feel pretty strongly about these things. But we need to create boundaries on even just the conversations. You need to protect yourself in the conversations that you have to ensure that you're protecting your emotional and your mental well-being. So as an example, in my house, we have a rule for people that visit our house that we do not talk religion or politics. Those are two things that are kind of off limits in our house, simply because those two topics of conversations usually create some extreme left and right views, which can create conversations that are very hard and sometimes too direct or too to the point that cause hard feelings ultimately. And we believe aren't necessary to have as a part of the relationships that we have with other people. Now you probably think, well, that's selfish and, not very worldly. And that is your right to think so. But for us, having those conversations do not serve us. We don't need to have the two sides clash, and we do not need to try and convince someone else of our views, and I do not need other people to convince me of their views. We believe you are entitled to your view, so it's not that we don't accept you for who you are and that you have those views. That's not it. We just do not need to have the conversations, because way too often those conversations can get out of hand and create hard feelings, and we just don't think it's necessary. So creating boundaries like we've done, that those topics just don't come up. And honestly, it's not even that we even have to say anything. Those topics just don't come up. But by creating those boundaries, we create a safe place for everybody that visit us, that they know that they won't have to have those difficult conversations, and they won't have to have that conflict and that confrontation, because the conversations just never go that direction. So by creating those boundaries, we protect our emotional and mental well-being, which we think is crucial, really. So these are the different types of boundaries. But why do we need boundaries? And some of it's kind of obvious. So, for example, for self-respect, boundaries show that you value yourself and your needs. It can be for healthy relationships, to foster that mutual respect and reduce misunderstandings and resentment. So the conversation I just had about those emotional and mental well-being by not talking about politics and religion, that's exactly it. We do it because we want to have healthy relationships that do not have that type of confrontation. And we do it out of self-respect for ourselves. And all of this also protects your energy. By protecting your energy, you prevent yourself from having burnout. So think about that time management. That's huge. Number one reason why people burn out in the real estate industry is because they spend all their time doing real estate. They do not set boundaries in their time. So by protecting your energy, by ensuring you set those boundaries for time, you're protecting yourself. It creates a balance too. By preventing people from taking up that time or getting into your emotional well-being or tapping your resources by, borrowing all your money, you are creating a bit of a balance in yourself to ensure that you can survive. And all of these things will absolutely reduce stress and resentment, which is an interesting thing to think about because often we don't set boundaries because we think it's going to be stressful. But boundaries are actually what prevent stress and burnout. Seems like a double-edged sword in a sense, but if you set those boundaries and you do it early and you do it with ease and grace, you'll reduce your stress level because one, you're protecting yourself and you're putting your own self-worth ahead of everybody else, which is crucial. And two, you're not worried about them encroaching on your boundaries because just having that happen where they encroach on your boundaries, your time, your physical space, your physical things, so borrowing the money or, sleeping on your couch rent-free causes stress. If you set those boundaries, it may seem difficult when they do it, but it will ultimately create less stress in your life. So, how do we set boundaries? How do we actually do it? We can talk about it all day long. We can dream about it, but how do we really do it? First, you just need to assess your needs. Determine where you're feeling overwhelmed or resentful or disrespected to determine if you need to set boundaries there. So I'll use an example of somebody living rent-free on your couch or in a room, whatever that might be, and they're not paying rent. If that is causing you discomfort because you're feeling like they're disrespecting you or you're beginning to resent them because they're not doing it, you need to set a boundary. This is definitely an opportunity for that. If it's causing you stress because they're abusing that situation, you need to set a boundary. To do it, you need to communicate. Obviously, you can't just think it and it'll happen. If only it worked that way. But you need to determine that it needs to happen. You need to then select an opportune time to do it. Again, I said earlier, don't do it when you're angry or upset or in the middle of a fight or, ticked off because they didn't pick up after themselves yet again and they still, or they went and spent a bunch of money on something else instead of giving you their rent money. Pick a time that you are not at that because you will make better decisions. And then frame the conversation positively. Use an I statement. I need you to have the rent to me by the end of the week as the mortgage is due. If you don't think you're going to be able to pay rent, I'm going to actually have to get somebody else to rent that space because I need it to be able to help pay for the mortgage. Or maybe you have somebody who's using a lot of your time and texting you, say in the real estate world, texting you at 9:00 at night or back and forth a whole bunch of times. Use an I statement here and say, I understand that you need this information, but I'm in the middle of this and I'll get back to you at this time. Or, I try not to respond to non-urgent messages after 6 p.m. I will get back to you first thing in the morning. Some of this information can be found in the email that I already sent to you at the beginning when we onboarded together, or something like that. But make it a statement that isn't making them feel negatively. Ensure that they are, understanding your perspective and that why this is important to you, and ultimately something that they are obligated to do because it's something that they had agreed to previously. So, maybe you had talked about rent and they hadn't been paying it, or perhaps you had set the expectation on your communication early on. But use an I statement so that you are protecting yourself, so it's clear to whoever you're talking to that, this is something that you believe in and that you need to set these boundaries, and that it's crucial that they try and help you with that. And then be consistent, because sometimes people are going to push those boundaries, right? But be consistent, stay on message, be sure that you're using that same message over and over again so that it's clear that that's what you believe in and that that is the boundary that you're trying to set for yourself so that you can get that response. So again, how do we set boundaries? Assess where it is that you need to set a boundary. Determine, are you feeling overwhelmed, resentful, or disrespected? Then be clear and direct with your communication so that there's no misunderstandings, and use a positive framed message. An I statement is helpful. So assess your needs, be clear, and use a positive I type statement to be able to set those boundaries. Saying no or setting boundaries is very challenging, as I'm sure you're aware, and will probably be your number one challenge, is having to say no or set that boundary, because we don't like to upset people. We don't like to, stir the pot or upset the apple cart, as they say. So doing that is very challenging for us. However, we need to remember that it is also challenging for us to not look after ourselves and to disrespect ourselves by not saying no and not setting those boundaries. And that by doing so, you're actually being the better person for yourself and for the other people around you. Because if you have set proper boundaries for yourself and are respecting yourself, you will be a better person for all of those people around you. You will not be burnt out, as an example. You will be able to show up in the capacity that you promised you would show up to that client because you're sticking to your boundary. And it's important to know that you're not being mean or selfish. You are looking after yourself. You're having self-respect and looking after your own well-being and your health. So boundaries are important and critical for you to be a successful entrepreneur and a successful human, for that matter. So I encourage you to look at your world, your business, your personal life, your family life, whatever it might be, and determine, are there areas that you need to set boundaries? And I'm not saying go out and change all of these things all at once. Just pick one. Like I've said many times in the podcast, pick one thing and make it different. So when we talk about habits, pick one habit and try and change that one habit. Here, pick one thing that you need to set a boundary on and set it and work with it. And then pick another one and another one and another one. And you'll see huge changes in your world, not only in your clients, but also in yourself. Because if you're starting to set those boundaries, so the time boundaries or the physical boundaries, and of course the emotional and mental and the material, what did I say? Physical, material, emotional, mental, and time. Setting all of those boundaries, any one of them is certainly going to see an improvement for yourself. So I highly encourage you to do so. And it won't be easy, but it'll certainly be rewarding. I just want to thank you for being here and coming for this conversation today. It means a lot to me, because if you're here, that means you want to do something just a little bit for yourself, and every little bit, helps. So thanks again for being here. It really does mean a lot. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that follow button, as I'd love it if you were here week to week. And if you're looking for information on myself, you can find me on Instagram at Rhonda_tough, on Facebook at just Rhonda Lavoie. You can also learn more about the membership, so the Tough Collaborative, at toughinstitute.com, or just DM me at any time, and I'd love to connect with you. I really do like to hear that you guys are even listening, because that's a big deal, right? I'd love to know, if I'm making an impact for you, because that just makes it worthwhile. So until next time, I really hope you have a marvelous day, and I can't wait to bring you another episode.